Hi, everyone. This is Bob Sorrentino from Italian Roots and Genealogy. Be sure to check out our blog and our YouTube channel and our newsletter and our great sponsors, Italy Rooting, Phil Italy, and Abitativa Casa. And today I have two brothers, Michael Valleriano and his brother Chip Valleriano. So welcome, guys. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having us.
Great to be here.
That's super. That's super. So now, are you guys in the same area? Do you live in the same area?
We do not. We haven't lived together for 42 years.
Wow.
About that.
But yeah, maybe longer. Once I graduated high school, I went to college. He was 4 years behind me. Then he went to college. But after I graduated college, I went up to New York for a job, and he stayed in the Cleveland area. So we both grew up outside of Cleveland.
Yeah, and I've so many Italians come from Ohio. Being from New York, we just think everybody who's Italian American came from New York, and I quickly learned that that's not the case at all.
Yeah, eventually we may get into this, but our great grandfather, who is the reason why we're here today, on this show, that is, went through Ellis Island and Brooklyn multiple times, and eventually he settled in the Cleveland area, most likely for work. So.
Yeah, like many others. So, when and why did you start doing the research in the first place?
Well, Chip has been doing research for basically forever, for 40 years. But having a young family, as I've heard listening to your show, as a kid, I didn't even think about it, asking and wanting to learn. It wasn't until I went to Italy a couple of times and people recognized my name as Italian, but they could never recognize where the name originated. And as I learned that in all the trips to Italy, names tend to be very regional. And that got me asking Chip more questions because he had done more work. So Chip, if you want to chime in.
Sure. I mean, I was always the curious child and always asking a lot of questions, especially to my dad's mother, my grandmother. And, she was sort of the daughter-in-law of the person that Mike and I are kind of focusing on, and that's our great-grandfather. She had never met him. She was married to his son. And I started my journey in the 80s. I came home from college, and I acquired a book that had charts and had genealogy charts at a bookstore. And I just started asking questions. And I sat down with her, and I sat down with two of Lucio's children, and they answered a lot. They had a lot of interesting stories. And in hindsight, I realized that was sheer luck that I sat down and did that, because they're not here with us anymore. And that is, you want to go closest to the source. And I learned a lot. I acquired some great images that I never thought I would see. I acquired a family photograph that my father had never seen of his father and the Valleriano family when they were younger. And it was just the sheer luck that I did it. But that is probably the most important thing to do, is to sit down with the older folks and ask some questions.
Yeah, for sure. That was really smart to do, whether it was luck or whatever. That was a great thing to do. I used to see my mother's mom every week, and we used to play cards. I was, 10, 12 years old. And I never thought in my wildest dreams to ask her any questions about Italy, because she would have told me, I'm sure, So that's fantastic that you did that.
Yeah, I mean, I just sort of I don't know if it's that they just didn't want to talk about it, because I would say to her, I remember asking her, I said, what did you and your mother talk about? And she'd say, she'd shrug her shoulders and say, not much, nothing. Did she talk about Italy? No. So I don't know if it was just, it wasn't such a great experience for them that they wanted to leave, or they just didn't talk about it. They were more focused on survival more so than anything.
Yeah, I think that's the case. But I think if people would have asked, I tell people now, take your iPhone or your phone and just record your grandparents, or if you're lucky enough to have great grandparents, sit down there and record them, because it's so important, whether you're Italian or anything else. It's so important to have that connection,
Yeah, I recently said, go ahead, Mike.
Absolutely. I wish, and not to beat a dead horse, but I wish I had spent a little bit of time. Which brings back to our last name, Valleriano. And I assume that the people that see this on YouTube will see the spelling of our last name, which in and of itself with two L's is wrong. But even our last name is not Valleriano. We don't know what it is. So getting back to our great-grandfather, the man who first came to the U.S. in 1898 was the first time, Chip?
I think I want to say maybe a little later in 1900. I'm thinking if I'm remembering right, but yeah, the Vallerianos came over early 1900s.
Yeah.
Like
so when I went to Ellis Island, I looked him up. You could see Lucio Valleriano with one L on the ship's records in Ellis Island, and that was interesting in and of itself. But really, what was most interesting to me was something that Chip unearthed in his ancestry hunting was a birth record in Italian from Lucio. Yeah. So Chip, 1900s Italian writing is not like Italian writing today. And it's just not like we would have English writing today versus in the 1800s. So he had it translated. At the time, it didn't mean a lot to me. And what it said was that Lucio was given the name Lucio Valleriano by the town magistrate and the director of the Rota di, and I didn't know what any of that stuff meant. And so things started coming to gel in my mind between having a recognizable Italian name in Italy, but not knowing where it's from, and then Lucio being given a name, and the concept of Rota didn't make a lot of didn't understand anything about that, and it was that combination of this. Given the name and then having a name, and then I'll add the third piece to that is the thing that it's almost hysterically funny that in 1950s, early 90s, my father went to school with one last name, Rocco. And the following day, he went to school and his name was Valleriano. And so that got me on the last 3+ years of looking at the history of your podcasts, other people's podcasts about Italian last names. So maybe more so me than Chip, I've been on a mission to find out what our real last name is. It's never going to change the Valleriano, but I just find it incredibly interesting that my dad could go to school in elementary school one day, one last name, the following day, a different last name. If it wasn't real, it'd be laughable, correct? So
yeah, that's so you don't know?
It was a foundling name.
So Lucio's name was given to him by the town of Slofra outside of Avellino in the mountains of Campania. And it's been said many times in your blog, and I'll repeat it. The concept of unwed mothers giving up their babies they wanted to give up the baby or they were coerced either by their family or the church was epidemic thing that occurred for millennia. I mean, going back almost 1,000 years. But after unification, it got worse for the South, as most of us know. And any Southern baby that was born out of wedlock was almost immediately whisked away from their mother and given up for adoption. In the case of Lucio, we believe he got pretty lucky in that he found a family that never adopted him. The family's name was Rocco, just so you know.
And they're also in our line.
Oh, okay.
We also have blood of theirs, which is also interesting. So he was brought in by this Rocco family, and the woman had just lost a baby. They had a baby that was lost. I don't know if it was miscarriage or what it was, stillborn. So she was already wet. And if you read any of the books on Italian baby abandonment, which I recommend to any Italian American to understand that, because it really tells a deep history of not just the nation that became Italy, but of our heritage and what went on, because there is some probability that every Italian American has been touched by that somehow, especially if they're from the South. So he was brought in by the Rocco family, and he assumed the name of the dead baby.
So
That's how the Rocco name came about. Go ahead, Chip.
well, what's so funny is the Valleriano family almost lived parallel names. On day-to-day life, they went by Rocco. But when they did something legally, they would put Valleriano. So Lucio, when he got married, put Lucio Valleriano on the wedding papers. But in day-to-day life, he obviously went by Gerardo Rocco. And then when he came to America, he shed the Valleriano name when he actually got to America.
So didn't that make you guys nuts trying to figure this out?
Yes, they picked up names and dropped names like crazy. And genealogically, it's sort of a mess because my grandmother, who my grandfather married, was a Rocco, and it's connected to the family that ended up raising Lucio. So they had issues, I think, when they got married. They had to prove they weren't related because she was going by Florence Rocco and he was Ralph Rocco, even though legally he was Ralph Valleriano. It's very messy.
But there must have been some sort of tie to those two families, no? To
You wonder.
Yeah, and that's what we're trying. That's the process we're going through right now. Chip tends to want to stay in America, and he does a lot of the groundwork for me. So when I go to Italy, I'm hunting on the ground, at the ground level for this information. So just this past spring, I went to Serino, which is where our grandmother was born. And it was also where Lucio was raised. He was raised in Serino. And so I went to Serino, stayed in the bed and breakfast, didn't know anybody in Serino. My wife and I did 5 and 10 mile hikes up into the mountains. And at the bed and breakfast, I carry my family tree from Ancestry on my phone. And wherever I go in Italy, I pull out my family tree and I ask about the names in the tree, if anybody knows them. All over the South. I've been in Puglia, Basilicata, Calabria. I've biked it thousands of miles in Italy. And I always pull out, I go to the town square and I walk up to the old man and I show him my family tree. And I did it in Serino in May, walked to the town square, walked up the old fellows, and I showed him my family tree, and the guy looked at it and he pointed. He says, 10K that way, in Italian, 10K. And I was floored. I crying like a baby, typical Italian, right? Crying like a baby. Somebody recognized my family tree. And it was absolutely, totally mind-blowing. And so where he was pointing up the road to the town of Serino is made up of 7 little hamlets. So each hamlet only has a couple hundred people. And the hamlet that he was pointing towards was the hamlet called Canale. And Chip previously had figured out that the family was from Canale di Serino. So my wife and I walked up to Canale, and it was a mind-blowing experience for me. Got back to the bed and breakfast, and I find out that the owner of the bed and breakfast was born in Canale. All of a sudden, it's like they were my family. The people knew me forever. I mean, all I could explain to people is it was surreal. It was a surreal feeling for me. I've always felt very comfortable in Italy. I walk in parts of Naples at night where people tell you not to walk, and I get treated differently there than I do when I walk in New York City. I'm nervous as heck. I walk in the bad parts of Naples, and I feel comfortable. I got to this bed and breakfast. It felt like home. I can't explain it. And these people obviously knew family members. Obviously, there's only 200 people in the hamlet. She must have knew something. We never got to the next level because we needed to leave. But I've already booked a month at that bed and breakfast for next September. All I could say is for anybody that listens and watches you, do it while you can. get there.
And Michael, Canale is close to Solofra. Like,
Yeah. So that's the other thing. So we mentioned that Lucio was born in Solofra. The town magistrate in Solofra gave him the name Lucio Valleriano. As the crow flies, Canale and Solofra are only hundreds of meters apart, but they're separated by a massive mountain. So if you're walking, then I did do the walk. It's about 6 miles around the mountain from Canale to Solofra. So it's the closest village from Solofra is Canale. Given that the woman that brought Lucio in was from Canale, I'm guessing that the town magistrate knew about this lady who lost her baby and offered up Lucio to them.
I mean, that's certainly a case for being persistent, I'm sure. But, I've heard other stories, like, as you probably heard, that, people just walk into the town, and I tell people, you have to go to the town. You don't know whether they ask or somebody recognizes them. There's all kinds of stories like that.
Again, like I said, I've been all over Italy, and I've ridden my bike over most of the country. And it's the first time that the name was recognized. And that really drove home the point that the name is very regional. Yeah. And so, but it's not so much today, but definitely back then. So, because if you do a search on Rocco in any town in Italy, you'll find a Rocco. If you did a phone book search or the Google search, but it's not like it was back then. The name Rocco probably was strongly associated to the rock, of Avellino.
Well, people didn't go more than than maybe the next town, if that, right? So,
correct.
And for me, I would say I'm a pretty serious genealogist, and I've been able to use DNA through Ancestry to kind of get matches in Solofra or who are connected to Solofra. And that has been immeasurable. I've been able to make guesses, but it's pretty powerful when you can find matches in these little towns, and you're like, or that are connected to these little towns. I start building out some of my matches charts to kind of figure out who his parents could be. And I have guesses, but it's always hard because as each generation passes, it sort of gets more diluted. But yeah. I mean, for me, I feel like genealogy is the basis of anyone who does genealogy is the question, who am I? Who are we? And we have it almost double, like, a last name is so important to Italians, and we have a last name that was sort of made up.
Yeah. Well, there's over 300,000 surnames in Italy. So
I've only found one other Valleriano in all of Italy. With 2 L's.
Really? Wow, that's
so, and he happens to be involved with the cycling industry. So, we do believe we have figured out through Ancestry and 23andMe, Lucio's mother likely has been, not even could have been, highly likely. And that's an interesting topic in and of itself, is how do you reach out to that family such that one, you don't scare them away, and B, they think you're strange. So we have not really approached that family in any detail. I fundamentally believe that if I do that, which I am going to do in September of 25, I need to do it in person. I want them to see a real person, not just a Facebook request or an email. It's more what I'm going to say the Italian way. It's a lot more about relationships in Italy than I grew up working for a big company or Chip working for a big company. The relationship business is diluted in America, partially because of the pandemic and everybody working from home. But in Italy, it's still that way. It's about establishing the relationship. Now, conversely, because of Chip's diving into some of the data, let me take one step back before I go there. I've always found it interesting that Chip and I, even though I have no artistic ability, and Chip is an artist, and he's not very technical, and I'm an engineer, that we ended up doing the same thing for a living, which was managing projects. And his were art projects. Mine were industrial building of industrial plants. but fundamentally we did the same thing. So it always struck me that there was probably something in our DNA that drove that. So in the course of hunting, Chip finding our DNA and diving further into it, I found a young woman, she's not young, she's closer to our age than not our age, in north of Milan in Switzerland, in Lugano. And I reached out to her on through 23andMe, and I said, I looked at your profile, and you're from Serino. You have these last names that are in our family tree. We must be related. And I don't normally do that, but there's just such a strong resemblance in the last names or overlap in last names. So she actually replied. And as you know, when you go to Europe, you have to use WhatsApp. So I did this through WhatsApp. And she replied. And come to find out, she's an engineer. She does project management. She rides a bike, and she's a triathlete, which I used to be. Like you talk about, there's something in the blood that drives to be like that. And that it keeps pounding into me, or it keeps rattling my head that there must have been something about Lucio that he had. He didn't know who his parents were, we presume. And he was brought in by this Rocco family. But unlike most abandoned children in Italy, he wasn't abused. A lot of if you read any of the books on abandonment, you know that there's 80% chance the baby died within the first year. 80% chance. If they lived, they usually didn't live a very good life, because they were usually sent out to the field and worked till forever until they potentially passed. Joe didn't have that. He was brought in by a family that actually cared for him, because he came to the U.S. with a trade, which was very unusual for an abandoned child. So he came to the U.S. as a bricklayer. And that's how I believe he ended up in Brooklyn, as we know, all Brooklyn bricks. And then eventually building stuff. We know of one house in our hometown that he did build that was brick. So brick is a very exacting thing. Things need to fit together. I fundamentally believe that's where Chip and I got our desire to want to organize and manage projects, is that, from that DNA, but it was luck that he got that, because again, most abandons didn't have that opportunity. I fundamentally believe that Chip and I got to where we are is because of whatever he did to get to where he was.
Well, and I did an interview with somebody, and we talked about that, because people think that the DNA is only your physical characteristics, but it's not. There are other inherent things, and what I find amazing is that you two guys are both doing the genealogy thing, because most of my cousins could care less, and I got a bunch of them, one or two, but and the other thing that's funny is my brother, although he didn't do it as a trade, my brother could draw anything. I mean, he decided one day he was going to do stained glass, and he did it. And then he said he got tired of that, so he decided he was going to, get a sandblast or an etch glass, and just like that, he's doing it. I can't draw a straight line, so go figure. But I do, like I said, I find it very interesting that two brothers have the same passion.
Spend a lot of time in the same house, you're going to either hate each other or
Yeah, but I think there's something that you both have that gene because I firmly believe, and you probably do too, that the ancestors, that they want to be found. They want to discover that. Yeah,
I feel like Mike and I are being pulled to find the truth, and it's almost like I think we sort of get emotional thinking about Lucio, because I think about, and I think I hear it in Mike's voice, how much he had to overcome. I mean, Italy is such a family-oriented, historically based culture, and family and who you're connected to matters so much. He sort of was, to be an abandoned child in Italy was a big thing. And, he made a decision to leave Italy and basically start new. And he, and I think that was pretty courageous. I think of all our ancestors who came here with nothing. How courageous they were. I don't even know if I could do it. They were courageous people, and they were survivors. He in particular, I just think that Mike and I sort of like feel like we have to sort of like write his story a little bit in terms of, I feel like, I don't know, it's almost like it's like the Valeriano name means so much to us, but then you think, wow, that was his foundling name. So it's sort of a struggle because, he left that name behind in Italy, but we love that name. It's so complicated, but,
Oh,
I mean, I don't know. I just, we have one picture of him, and that picture I don't know.
so the other interesting thing is Bob mentioned to you earlier that our father went to school one day with the last name Rocco, and then the following day the last name Valleriano. And Chip also mentioned that on all legal papers, Lucio was Valleriano with one L. Our grandfather was Valleriano with one L. My dad, when he went to school that next day with Valleriano, the principal or somebody in the town put two L's in. So the whole concept of record keeping back then just convolutes the entire process. I mean, being able to track, so really in Italy, we go back, we're one L Valleriano. But even because it was a given, well, by the way, one L Valleriano, there's actually quite a number of one L Vallerianos in the U.S. There's only like 30 families in the entire U.S. with two L Vallerianos, and they're not likely related because it was a given. I can remember, I'm sure Chip does, my dad, whenever he would travel, not that he traveled much, but whenever he'd go somewhere, he'd open up the phone book in the hotel and look for a Valleriano. And in one case, he found one, and it wasn't too far from our hometown. They weren't related, but they ended up being buddies. This family that was like 40 miles away from my dad, and my dad ended up becoming buddies with this family that was 40 miles away just because they had the same last name, even though they knew they weren't related. So, yeah, so finding that last name, I don't want to change my last name, but the whole story behind it it's funny and intriguing and something that it drives me to want to learn more about it just because of that. So,
and there are a lot of people, with foundling last names, and and some of them much more stigmatizing in Italian versus ours was pretty, I think, not very stigmatizing. So he lucked out that way. But again, a last name is so important to Italians, and then to have yours made up, it's
See,
sort of like,
that's why it's just in the back of my mind. I keep thinking that them, especially since he was treated well, that there may have been, some sort of family tie. Now, my wife's mother, her father, here they went by Poeta, Poetta. But when I found her grandfather, he was Proieto. So he's somewhere in the line there was a foundling. I don't think it was him. I think it was before him, but obviously somewhere down the line there was a foundling. The most famous foundling that I've come across was John Martin. I don't know if you guys ever heard of him. He was the bugler in the 7th Cavalry at the Little Bighorn, and he was the only survivor because he was sent to go tell some other colonel or general or something that they were going to get slaughtered. But his real name in Italy was Giovanni Martino, and he was a foundling. He was left in the wheel.
and that gets into a whole another set of things. The whole concept of last naming in Italy. Lucio was lucky in another way, in that soon before, right after unification in the late 1860s, but even just before unification, Napoleon said, we need to stop naming babies Proietti and Esposito. And when unification occurred, that government agreed. So then you start diving into that whole process of last naming of abandons. It's very intriguing. So I write a blog now so that these stories don't go away for my grandkids. Because if they don't ask me, they will go away. Just like me, my kids aren't interested today because they have too much going on. but I want to make sure that stuff is around. So I was diving deep into last naming. I can't read the legislation, so all I can do is go by what I find on the internet in other places. So the government gave the town mayor or whoever ran the town the responsibility to name. And the name Valeriano with one L, the Valerianus was a Roman emperor in the 200s. Most Roman emperors were not nice men. And for some reason, Valerianus was. And his family is from up in the mountains near Avellino. So Valerianus was only an emperor for a few years because the rich people didn't like the fact that he was giving their money away to the poor, so they killed him. And I believe that mayor either knew the history of Valerianus or something related to Avellino, and that's how he ended up with the name Valeriano. And again, Valerianus, if you look in Wikipedia, is with one L. The whole concept, again, because I have lots of friends, Chip does too, with the last name Esposito or Esposito, and Poietti. Those poor people, they were, I don't like to use the term abused, but really they were taken advantage of in Italy because they had no family to protect them. And then when they came over to try to escape that to Ellis Island and eventually the Bowery and then maybe over to Brooklyn, the Padrones did the same thing to those poor people. So again, Lucio was very lucky that he went by the name Gerardo Rocco, but then so there is no stigma to the name Gerardo Rocco. And I think that set of circumstances led to the luck and fortune that Chip and I have.
Yeah, no, I could see that. I can understand that. And that's interesting because I do know that some people, even when they left them at the church, some children got, names like, beautiful child, and then other children got, very nasty names or, based on a physical feature or something like that. And they could be very unkind to those people. But it is really fascinating. And, what's really fascinating is some of the kids that were adopted from Italy in the 1960s and came to America. And I know a couple who found their families because they were persistent, but the mothers didn't have to leave their name in those cases.
Well, I'm reading Real Areno's book currently. And so the previous book I read, as well as the internet stuff that I read, was from Kersner or Cart, the guy that's the Kircher.
Yeah.
That's how you pronounce the name?
I think so. Yeah.
He kind of wrote the Bible on Italian infant abandonment. So he's the professor emeritus in Rhode Island at Providence University. Theoretically, he's the U.S. foremost scholar on Italian American studies.
I have to dig him up for sure.
Yeah, I'll send it to you.
Yeah.
Very difficult book to find. It's been out of print. I found it in Australia. Yeah, if you look on Amazon right now, maybe in the $400 to $500 range. I got lucky; it didn't have to spend that much. So, and I guard that book with my life because it goes through over 1,000 years of Italian infant abandonment. It's in sequential order. The current book that I'm reading, it's more focused on the 40s, 50s, and 60s post-World War II. And she's really getting into that. I thought it went away, truthfully. I thought, somewhere when the U.S. stopped allowing as many immigrants come to the U.S., I was thinking that maybe it dwindled down in Italy because Italy was just getting a little more prosperous under Mussolini. But obviously it didn't, because right after the war, it exploded. And this whole book is about all the people that were abandoned around World War and what happened to those people. It's also a sad story. Sometimes it's hard to read. I mean, you read the other book, the first book I mentioned, I go to bed at night crying because I do my reading at night before I go to bed. And I would think about Lucio or these people in the case of Lucio, or the abstract, the people I didn't know. And it was heartbreaking. And so again, I give Lucio all the credit. Whatever he did for us, he did. And we're a living testament to that. So,
Well, and also it's hard. You have to remember you have to put everything through the lens of that time period versus how we feel about things today. I mean, today it's like, oh, no big deal, but back it was huge, absolutely huge to have been. And I often think about what he carried around internally,
yeah.
knowing that he was given up by his parents, especially, again, laying Italian. What does that feel like to be given up by your parents
Yeah.
anonymously?
Well, the name of the first book is called Sacrifice for Honor. It was about getting pregnant out of wedlock was a dishonorable thing for the family. So the baby was sacrificed to maintain the honor of the family. Typically, they would send the woman away, and it was made secret that she birthed the child somewhere. Even in the current book that I'm reading, I think I can't remember the exact title. It's the price of childbirth, or the price of a child. I think.
Yeah, price of a child. Yeah.
So yeah, just the titles themselves are sad.
And getting back to like talking to my, Lucio's children, his daughter would say, as did my grandmother, they'd say his mother gave birth to him. She was older and she couldn't cope, so she gave him up. So that was sort of the line that the children and my grandmother, his daughter-in-law, that was the line that they kind of put forth, that she couldn't cope raising him. And, then his son threw out this, his father was a guard for the Pope. So you hear all these stories and you think, is this the line that they were given to make it acceptable, to kind of, make it okay? She was old and she couldn't take care of him. But I have since figured out, I think she was a domestic servant, and, probably was part of a classic storyline, that happens with, domestic.
Well, I have my story. My father's grandfather, his birth record shows him as filio naturale, which means he was born out of wedlock. The interesting thing about it is, I have I call them birth cards. I have his birth record, but then I also have from a genealogist that helped me in Italy, what I refer to as like a birth card. So it's a little card there. And on that card has the same birthday. Everything's the same except for the mother. One says Maria Savino and the other says Maria Leone. And all his siblings are all from Maria Savino. So now he was from a noble family. So what I think is that somehow he was able to be recognized, or was recognized by his father, and was then able to assume, but I guess he wasn't considered a bastard in the sense that we would think of it, right? Only because they had money and they had standing.
That could be Lucio's case also. So
I would love you have to share that information with Mike and I about, how you went about that process of getting that card. I was told by a genealogist that I should try to locate his baptismal record, but I don't know if that's actually going to give him any information.
So let me add on to that. So in the town of Slofra, the town hall is now in the palace of the Orsini family. So and Orsini's a big name in the U.S., we know that. And so I actually went to the town hall in May. I showed that same birth record in Italian to the clerk at the desk, and she pointed me upstairs to the records office. And I walked upstairs to the records office. It was 12:02, and the office closed at noon. It wasn't opening until 4 o'clock on Tuesday. This was a Monday, and we were already flying out from Naples, so we wanted to get a chance to do that. And so, so are we associated with the Orsinis? Who knows? In the little village of or hamlet of Genealogy, again, by the way, in Slofra, that Orsini Palace is immediately across the street from the main cathedral of the town, as always was. In Genealogy, it's the exact same thing. There's a church there that has a statue of a guy named Francesco Salamina, who also is in our family tree. And Francesco was an internationally famous artist in the 1600s and 1700s. And if you go to any church in Naples, there is some work by Salamina in there. So immediately across the street from that church is a palace for the Pelosi family. So it's possible. Is it probable? Yes. Is it possible? Who knows? But it's interesting and fun to think about the potential relationships that could be built into our DNA. I doubt the people at that level of society do DNA like people like us do.
Well, the Italians don't do it in general because they don't have to, because they could go to the cemetery and find 500 years of.
I almost want to send my brother to Italy with a box, 10 boxes of DNA tests, but I think they would look at him like he's nuts.
Crossed my mind twice. I said I should bring some tests, and then I was like, maybe, maybe I'm imposing on them. But I have Orsini in my blood going back to, I don't know, 1500, 1400.
Yeah, and they're very big in southern Italy.
Yeah.
Whole process of being turned away at the door because the door's closed. It's. I mean, I have so much drive built into my system right now to get to that door because if we're to find a birth record, that's like finding gold for me right now. I know that Chip really wants us to find it.
Well, and you wonder how much. I'm sure he obviously wasn't the only abandoned child in the town. You wonder if people know, or if people have an inkling, or if there is indeed historical documentation, or was it just understood that, oh yeah, it happened. You wonder how much people know about the history of abandonment in their town.
Well, and I think it would depend on whether he was left in the wheel or whether he was just handed off to somebody. That there's probably well, I'm sure there's a difference there because it may have been, like I said, somebody lost a child and they said, well, we can't take a replacement, or somebody's daughter actually had the child and then the mother said it was hers. That happened a lot, right? So it happened here where people did that. In fact, we would have a discussion about somebody that we know that we were thinking, you know what, I bet you it was the mother's child.
So on that birth record, it mentions two last names of people that were present at the time that Lucio was given the name Lucio Valleriano. And one is another family name. It's a Salmanian name. And that woman that I mentioned that lives in Switzerland, she's a Salmanian. So there is some connection there, obviously in DNA as well as to Lucio. Getting back to that clerk in Slofra, I do not believe that she would have sent me upstairs if she didn't know, and if she didn't feel there was records up there for me to find.
Yeah, I bet you're right. Sure.
So that Salmania name. So Francesco was famous enough that one of the times I was in Naples, I go to Naples every time I go there because I find the place incredibly fascinating and fun. Mm-hmm. So his palace is right adjacent to one of the foremost museums in the world for art, and most of the major art from the eruptions at Vesuvius over Herculaneum and Pompeii. That art resides in this museum. So Francesco's house is immediately across the street from this museum. And I went there one day, and it's not a house, it's a palace. And it's now a bed and breakfast and an apartment complex, like a lot of palaces are now. And I was ringing all the doorbells of the apartment. And then finally somebody opened the door and I walked in. I'm going in. And I start walking down the ramp, and I'm with my wife, and she's a little more tentative. I have a lot of. I'll keep my mouth shut.
I know what you mean. I think we get the picture.
So, I start walking down the ramp into what used to be a courtyard, but it's now a parking lot. Somebody starts yelling at me. What, in Italian, what are you doing? And I turn around, look at him, and I pointed to myself. I said, "Io Salmania." And the guy didn't believe me. So again, I take out my phone, I pull out my family tree, and I show him Francesco Salmania in my family tree. He turned white as a ghost. He was the owner of the bed and breakfast, and he thought I was there to claim my property. I said, no, I don't want the property. I don't want the headache. We ended up becoming friends, and we talked via there maybe once or twice a year. And he brought me into the bed and breakfast, and he brought me into Salmania's quarters, which I thought were outstanding.
Wow, that's something. That's nice. That's great.
Yeah. So whether or not we're true related, we believe we are. We don't know if he is a great-grandfather many times removed or uncle many times removed. But if you, in the typical Italian naming scheme, every other generation of men, there is a Francesco Salamino. And this is on my grandmother's side, by the way. So we pretty much believe he's somehow related to us. That's our brush with greatness in Italy.
My claim is on the Hotel Caracciolo. So,
oh, that's a beautiful place.
But I don't think I'm going to get it. So,
so Bob, where's your family from in Italy?
Well, my mother's family is from a small town in Puglia, Torito, outside of Bari. My dad's family is from, well, my father's father, they were originally from Pagani, and then they lived in Naples, right off of Via Carbonara. And my grandmother's family, my grandmother's father's family were the Counts of Montebello in Calabria. And also they were, her great-grandmother was the Duchess of Capricotta. Her mother was Caracciolo from the Princes of Avellino. So that's my claim to the hotel. I had no idea. I had no idea when I started this thing. But next time you're in the Duomo in Naples, there's one of the side chapels that my third great grandmother, the Duchess Beatrice Capici Piccicelli, she's got a plaque there with her and her husband. Her husband was Giacomo Piomalo. He was the Count of Montebello. And in the floor, there's the Capici Piccicelli crest. But when we went to Capricotta, they were just fabulous there. They just treated us so great. And they actually had investments from I guess around 1790 or something like that my fourth great grandmother had made in Naples with the crest on it and all of that kind of stuff. And the priest said, this is only just one example. We have lots more like this. Avellino, I'll send you what they did when we entered. Have you been to the palace in Avellino? I don't know if you've ever been to Avellino, the city.
I've been up there, but it was more in passing than it was. It was more going to Serino and Slofa versus staying in Avellino.
Yeah, well, like most of these places, the palazzos now or the city hall or whatever. So they bring us into this courtyard, through the archway, and they have people dressed from the 1600s, and they start blowing these trumpets and welcome me and my family in.
Oh my!
I'm like this doofus. What the hell is going on here? But truly. And I asked, I said, I'm just this guy from America. And Letizia said to me, we don't forget. We don't forget in Italy. So the fact that you can prove that you're a descendant of the Princes of Avellino, you're a very important person here. That was flabbergasting, It was just, and indeed, they treat us like that there. And then also when we went to Montebello, they treated me like I was the heir or something like that. That's just the way it was. And it was so, it was weird, to be honest with you.
Well, I always say that we have more genetics in Italy than we have in America. Thousands of years. The only time I had been in Italy, I felt like the earth was falling me down.
Yeah, I know. It's amazing.
I mentioned earlier that family that owned the bed and breakfast with the woman from Canale. When we left, she hugged me like a cousin would hug me, like a brother would hug me. It was deeper than just, I could feel the belonging from the way I only met the lady 48 hours earlier, and that she's hugging me like we're long lost cousins forever.
I didn't know that my father's first cousins were still alive in Italy. They're in their 90s. We walked into their apartment. I didn't know my cousin, my dad. He's also my dad's first cousin, but he's younger than me. Long story. But anyway, we walked into that apartment, and there was a woman that she resembled my grandmother. And the instant they saw me was like they dug up treasure. It's so incredible. It really is. It really is. I've told this a million times. I'm going to bore everybody, but I'll bore them again. Too bad. They had my parents' wedding photo from 1944 that my grandmother sent. my grandmother's handwriting on the back of it.
That's incredible.
And
That's
then
incredible.
yeah, and then just 2 weeks ago, about 2 weeks ago, I got a message on Facebook from somebody, Guillermo no, it's not a Sorrentino. Can't remember his last name now. He said, I'm your cousin. And he sent me a picture of my father's family before my father was born. I have the same picture. And I only knew that my grandfather had a brother here and a sister in Italy. He had actually 4 other siblings. So after 15 years of doing this research, out of the blue, this guy tells me I'm your cousin.
That's gold. I mean, I think that's what Mike and I are hoping for in Slow For, that someone knows something, or you heard a story once, or something, because as you interact more and more and more with people, especially family, and that something else pops up and something else pops up. It's like about peeling an onion. And I'm hoping that's what happens when Mike goes back to Solofra, that, something else comes forward, or, something occurs. When he went the last time and the office was closed, it wasn't his moment to find out, Obviously Lucio wanted him to wait another year or so. But I do believe that.
And that's
I do believe we'll find out.
That's kind of what happened with us. We had to cancel our trip to Naples because it was like just when COVID broke out, and we postponed it for a year and a half. And a couple of weeks before we went, I was notified by my cousin Nicola, and he's the one who brought us to the apartment. So had we gone 18 months before, I probably would have known him and probably never would have got there. So timing's everything, I suppose. So next time you go, the guy will be open.
Well, I'm going to make sure of it. There's no question about it. I'm going to be there almost a month, so I should be able to
park yourself in front of the place.
Yeah, by the way, Renato and Marisa, the people that own the bed and breakfast in Serino, I'm coming for a month. Because I'm sure the lots.
Yeah. Super. Well, listen, guys, this has been absolutely fascinating. Great stories for sure. No question about it. I mean, we could probably go on for another 3 hours, but
easily.
But we'll have to when you get there and you find everybody, we'll have to do a replay. So
fair enough.